Welcome back to DCB's weekly college football recap. Ladies and gentlemen, it is that time of week again where we recap the week that was of college football. In this case, it began on Tuesday this week, and we also look ahead to the most interesting games of week 9. And we are now more than halfway through the regular season of college football. It has flown by with, as always, no shortage of chaos, but still plenty to learn about these teams moving forward as we wind down the race for the playoff. As always, we begin by quickly going over the weekday matchups that got us started in week 8. There were 3 games on Tuesday, 2 in the Conference USA and 1 in the Sun Belt. The Conference USA actually exclusively played their games on Tuesday and Wednesday this week. They seem to think they're doing themselves a favor by having games on at unique time slots, but after watching these games after a couple of weeks, it's hard to continue to go back to them. FIU went into Western Kentucky and absolutely dominated them 25-6. It looked like the Hilltoppers were the favorites in this conference, and actually, if you look at the odds after this game, they still are the slight favorites to win this league, even with this big home loss. There was some question leading up to the game whether FIU's starting quarterback would play, but he did end up suiting up, and the Panthers absolutely took care of business here, shutting out Western Kentucky in the second half and forcing 3 interceptions from quarterback Maverick McIver. Stunning loss there, but nothing is really a shocker in this league at this point. None of these teams are very good, and anyone can beat anyone on any given night, except apparently Sam Houston. If we move over to Wednesday, they fall to 0-7 with a home loss to UTEP. UTEP has been bouncing back and forth between 2 quarterbacks. They have the former 5-star recruit Malachi Nelson, who has now transferred down multiple times after starting his career at USC. He still hasn't put up numbers against this level of competition, so UTEP finally decided to pull the plug and go full-time with last year's starter, Skylar Locklear, and he actually had a very solid game in this one, completing 21 of his 26 passes, very efficient, and led his team to a 35-17 win on the road. There was a Sunbelt game on Tuesday night. This one was also a really rough watch between Arkansas State and South Alabama. South Alabama led 14-3 going into the fourth quarter, but Arkansas State comes from behind and wins it outright 15-14. They had countless opportunities to take control throughout the game and probably deserved to win it outright. But at the same time, it felt like South Alabama's offense took their foot off the gas way too early, and they paid the price for it. They are now 1-6, dropping this one as an 8.5-point home favorite. Their only win was against an FCS program, so very hard to trust this team going forward. There was a pretty bad beat if you were betting the Thursday game between Tulsa and East Carolina, or a good beat depending on which side you were on. Tulsa decided to kick a field goal with under 2 minutes remaining to cut the score to 14. East Carolina was favored by 16.5 points. They controlled the game throughout, put up 568 total yards of offense. ECU's results have been pretty easy to predict this season. They dominate against inferior opponents, and they struggle against better teams. It really comes down to whether they can control the line of scrimmage or not, and they did so in this game. Tulsa has the win over Oklahoma State, but they fall to 2-5. Friday night is where we get into some Power 4 action, and there were a couple of stunning results that night, starting with the number 2 team in the country, Miami, losing at home outright to the Louisville Cardinals 24-21. And judging by the box score, this really was not a fluke. Watching this game, it didn't feel like it either, and Louisville outgained Miami in total yards. They forced 4 Carson Beck interceptions, and their stud running back found plenty of success on the ground. Isaac Brown runs for 113 yards on 15 carries. Huge win for Louisville, and Miami, once again under Mario Cristobal, just struggles to maintain consistency of performance. They've looked dominant through their first 5 games, but off of a bye, had a very sleepy start here and just weren't able to recover in time. So I'm sure that they will probably run the table the rest of the way. They don't have a particularly hard schedule. So I still expect to see them in the ACC title game, and they'll likely be favored in that game. This would be a good time to hop on them to win the ACC. Good value with them now as no longer the favorite. Georgia Tech has jumped over them, but everything in front of Miami, despite this loss, I fully expect them to bounce back next week. The other major upset on Friday night was Minnesota winning outright as a touchdown underdog at home against Nebraska. Nebraska has not won in Minneapolis since 2015, and I believe they've been favored in every matchup on the road, and yet Minnesota just continues to beat them year after year. Nebraska unable to solve the Gophers' defense in this one, only putting up 6 points the entire game, 2 field goals in the first half. Just a disaster at the line of scrimmage. Their offensive line has really struggled throughout the year. I believe that Raiola has improved this season and he's got some better playmakers to work with, but he took 9 sacks in this game and they really were not able to get the run game going either. Minnesota has started to get Darius Taylor back involved more as he slowly works his way back from an injury, and he had a very productive game in this one, 148 yards on 6.2 per carry and a touchdown as well. They really didn't have to do that much on offense, but Taylor did his job in the second half to put the Huskers away. Big win for Minnesota as they move to 5-2, and Nebraska will no longer be ranked after this one. Seems like they just come so close every year. This year, they actually had started to win some of their one possession games, but just hard to get over the hump with Nebraska recently. Seems like it'll be on to next year again for them. There was an ACC matchup as well on Friday night between two bottom feeders, I would say. Cal survived a scare here against North Carolina. Really could have lost this game, but North Carolina fumbled at the Cal 13-yard line with about 3.5 minutes to go, down 3 points. Cal able to run off almost the rest of the clock from there and secure the victory. They move to 5-2, and their schedule continues to be one of the easiest in the Power Four. North Carolina may have shown some improvements here, but I think it's just an issue more so with California's defense. On to the main show on Saturday, where there were extremely chaotic games from start to finish. This is part of the reason why we love college football. Nearly anything can happen on any given Saturday. For example, Duke, once again favored at home against a ranked team. Second time this season. After losing to Illinois in the first matchup, they were once again a favorite here against number 12 Georgia Tech. And on their first possession of the game, they went 92 yards down the field before fumbling at the Georgia Tech 1. That ball was returned for a touchdown. Georgia Tech never relinquished the lead from there, winning this one 27-18. Duke's offense is very productive, both through the air and on the ground. They put up nearly 450 yards of offense in this one. It's just once again a Manny Diaz coach team. Way too many mistakes. Obviously that key fumble, but they also turned it over on downs in their second possession and just were unable to finish drives. Missed a field goal in the fourth quarter, which didn't help things. It's very hard to know how to grade this team moving forward. Very talented offense that just makes way too many mistakes. Another very chaotic game was in the Big 12 between Baylor and TCU. These two teams usually play very crazy back and forth shootouts. Baylor continues to be one of the most aggressive teams in the country, going for it on fourth down another 4 times in this game. Their offense ran a total of 89 plays in this one, but just were not productive enough. TCU put up 21 points in the second quarter and were able to hold on the rest of the way despite an onslaught in the fourth quarter from Baylor, 42-36. The final here snuck over the total after a very dead start in this one. Both of these teams also very unpredictable moving forward. Not great defensively, but can score against virtually anyone. Staying in the Big 12, we had a very competitive game between two very solid teams, Houston and Arizona. Arizona's offense got off to a great start in this one, putting up 14 points on their first two drives, but then unfortunately 0 points on their remaining four drives of the first half, allowing Houston to score 28 straight and take control of this one. Arizona did come back and tie it in the fourth quarter with another two touchdown drives. Really, the story in this one was the ball control for both offenses in the second half. The third quarter only featured a grand total of two possessions as Houston opened with a 17-play, 75-yard touchdown drive, and Arizona responded with their own score of 13 plays and 75 yards. The fourth quarter also only featured three drives. Arizona only touched the ball two times in the second half. They scored touchdowns on both, but were unable to win the game. Houston finishes it off with a field goal drive that takes off the remaining 4:48. They kick the game winner as time expires and pick up another big win to move to 6-1. One of our favorite futures of the season was Houston over 6.5 wins. They've got five more opportunities to get us one more and two more for an alternate line. So go Cougars, go. Moving over to the Big Ten, sticking in the early window, Michigan rolls to a dominant win against Washington 24-7 in the Big House. This game was tied at halftime, but Michigan really missed some opportunities early to blow this thing open. Their defense stood up in this one, holding a solid Washington rush offense to just 40 yards on 23 carries. Michigan is a very injured team on both sides of the ball right now. They're starting three redshirt freshmen along the offensive line. Both of their top two tight ends were out of this game, as well as the leading rusher in the Big Ten, Justice Haynes. Thankfully for Michigan, they have a very solid backup running back in Jordan Marshall, and he was the bell cow in this one. 25 carries for 133 yards and a touchdown. Bryce Underwood was very efficient in the pass game as well, completing 21 of his 27 attempts for 230 and two touchdowns. He used his tight ends very effectively, even without both of the two normal starters. Zach Marshall was the leading receiver in this one, and the defense picked off DeMond Williams three times to seal this one. Washington was one of the more popular upset picks of the week, and even as a Michigan fan, I was a little nervous going into this one, but it was good to see the defense reestablish themselves going into a big rivalry game this weekend in East Lansing. The biggest game of the early window was in the SEC, where LSU traveled to Nashville and came up with their second loss of the season. Vanderbilt, another big win under Clark Lee. They moved to 6-1, 31-24 the final here. LSU's offense has actually improved quite a bit the last 2 weeks against South Carolina, and in this game they looked solid throughout. But it was actually that Blake Baker-led defense that was unable to get a stop in this one when they needed to. We've said it plenty of times that Vandy just continues to be able to score on virtually everyone they play against. They struggled a little bit against Alabama, had some key turnovers, but outside of that game, they've been dominant offensively. They ran it 45 times in this one for 239 yards and three touchdowns. Just took it to LSU at the line of scrimmage offensively. Diego Pavia wasn't really asked to do too much in this one, and he looked very comfortable back there when he did have to pass. Vandy's schedule all of a sudden looks much more workable looking ahead, and they could seriously be a contender for the college football playoff still. Moving a little later in the day, but staying in the SEC, Florida wins the final game of the Billy Napier tenure. He was relieved of his duties this morning, and if we're being honest, this was what we call a struggle win here for Florida. Mississippi State has been an undervalued team all season, but Florida still had a pretty sizable talent advantage here. They probably should have scored more than 23 points, but the play calling under Napier has been one of the biggest question marks throughout his time there. We will see how this Florida team responds against Georgia in 2 weeks off of their bye. Another big matchup was going down in Athens between two top 10 teams, Ole Miss and Georgia. It looked for a while here like Ole Miss was going to take control as they led by 2 possessions late in the third quarter, but once again, Georgia just continues to be a very resilient team. They seem to fall behind in nearly every game, but this is now 3 straight SEC wins. They also came from behind to win at Tennessee in the SEC opener. And when you're watching this team, you can almost see a switch flip. When they get the momentum on their side, there's not much you can do to stop it because there's a lot of talent on this team. They don't always have a ton of explosiveness on offense, but the defense in the fourth quarter clamped down in a way that only Georgia can do. Ole Miss had 3 drives, a total of 11 plays for 13 yards. Georgia will also be on a bye this week before facing Florida on a neutral site in 2 weeks. A couple of major results in the group of 5. North Texas and James Madison both really flexed their offensive muscle in wins over UTSA and Old Dominion, respectively. North Texas needed a rebound here after the South Florida game, and they got it in a major way, reestablishing themselves as a contender for the American Conference. And James Madison made themselves the clear frontrunner in the Sun Belt. Old Dominion has now lost back-to-back games after a very promising start to the season. Texas State continues to be probably the worst coached team in America. This is one of the most talented group of 5 teams, but they fall to 3-4. They've lost 3 consecutive games. Another one in overtime here against Marshall. They put up 555 total yards, nearly 100 more than Marshall here on the road, and yet couldn't get it done. Just perplexing decisions made by the staff week after week and squandering what is a very, very talented offense. Ohio State continues to roll through the Big Ten. I am seriously starting to question the overall quality of this conference. 34-0, the final score in Madison. Wisconsin has now been shut out in back-to-back home games after not being shut out since 1980. I'm honestly not sure how Luke Fickell still has his job. Maybe they're just waiting till the end of the season for some reason. But Wisconsin just looks like a dead team right now. Ohio State did whatever they wanted on both sides of the ball. Wisconsin never showed any life or even a chance to put up some points in this one. So, very grim right now in Madison. The coaching search really should start sooner rather than later. Probably the biggest upset of the day in terms of the AP rankings was Arizona State beating Texas Tech outright 26-22. They closed as about a 7.5 point home underdog, but their defense played incredibly well in this one. Texas Tech has been going back and forth between quarterbacks this season, and Baron Morton, I guess, was too injured to suit up for this one. They went full time with the freshman Will Hammond, and while he did make some big plays to try and bring them back in the fourth quarter, he did really struggle in this game, throwing a key interception early in the third quarter that led to Arizona State's only touchdown. That is prior to the game-winning score with 34 seconds remaining. This did not feel like a fluke, and Arizona State's defense set the tone from the very beginning. The Big 12 now becomes a much more interesting race, although Texas Tech remains a heavy favorite to win the league. Another very chaotic game in the SEC in the afternoon was between Texas A&M and Arkansas. This one started a little bit later than most of the 3:30 kickoffs. A&M wins this 45-42 in Dallas. For some reason, this game is played on a neutral site. Someone will have to explain that one to me. Arkansas did put up a fight offensively for the second consecutive week after putting up 31 on the road at Tennessee last week, but they've now lost 5 consecutive games. We'll see how much longer Bobby Petrino can keep them motivated. On the other side, Texas A&M has now shown multiple times that they can win any type of game, whether it's a shootout or a slugfest. Marcel Reed maybe had his best performance of the season in this one. Very efficient, throwing for 3 touchdowns and running one in as well. Oregon bounced back in a major way, beating Rutgers 56-10 on the road. No surprise that they bounced back with a win, but to do it in such an emphatic fashion, I think says something about this team. Dan Lanning is a great motivator, and it showed itself in the run game in this one. Oregon ran for 415 yards and 4 touchdowns in Piscataway. As good as Rutgers' offense is at times, their defense is extremely leaky. Kaliak Manis had his worst performance of the season by far, completing just 8 of 25 passes and 2 interceptions for less than 100 yards. Staying in the Big Ten, let's talk about UCLA. Off back-to-back wins where the offense had shined, but in this one it was the defense that really limited Maryland in a major way. The offense did come up clutch, driving down the field in just 40 seconds to set up the game-winning field goal. But through 3 quarters, Maryland had only 3 points on offense. UCLA is showing that they have talent on both sides of the ball, and as much as I hate to keep saying it, I really believe that the coaching held this team back at the beginning of the season. UCLA came into the season number 26 overall in the talent composite, and they are starting to show that. Third really tough loss in a row for Maryland. They will have a bye before hosting Indiana in what could be a really great spot to get them getting some points at home. Penn State looked for most of the game like they were actually going to get a Big Ten win. So close yet so far. Iowa comes back and wins a close one, 25-24. This was a very ugly game as Penn State's backup quarterback, Ethan Grunkemeyer, attempted 28 passes for just 93 yards, 3.3 yards per attempt. He threw 2 interceptions. Penn State ran for just 3.8 yards per carry. And Iowa also only threw the ball for 68 yards. So just not a lot of offense here. Yet still somehow these two teams got over the total of 41.5. A big reason for that was Penn State blocked a field goal attempt from 64 yards. Iowa was trying something very ambitious there to end the first half. Penn State blocks it and returns it for a touchdown, reminiscent of the best of the James Franklin era. Unfortunately for them, the Iowa offense did actually find a little bit of rhythm in the fourth quarter. They ran the ball pretty effectively in the second half, and they score the go-ahead touchdown with just under 4 minutes remaining. Penn State's offense unable to respond, and they move to 0-4 in the Big Ten. Number 18, Virginia, survived another scare, this time at home against Washington State. This game was off of a bye for Virginia, so I expected a much better performance here. I think we increasingly have to take this team's 6-1 record with a grain of salt. Their best win over Florida State now looks less impressive by the week. This is now 3 straight wins that you could argue they've been very fortunate to get. Beating Florida State in double overtime, beating Louisville in overtime with 150 total yards fewer than the Cardinals. And then in this one, they really did not look good for most of the game against Washington State either. They were outgained once again. The offense had 4 total first downs in the first half and just 1 in the second quarter. They struggled to run the ball. Washington State had more time of possession, and Virginia actually trailed 20-10 going into the fourth quarter. They tied the game with just under 3 minutes to go. The ensuing kickoff, Washington State made a dramatic mistake. One of their kick returners called for a fair catch, but the other one caught the ball. And I guess by rule, that means the ball is dead at that spot. So Washington State took over at the 1 yard line. A couple of plays later, their quarterback unable to escape from the end zone. It was very close and honestly somewhat controversial. I did think maybe the ball crossed the plane to the 1 yard line before his knee was down, but they rule it a safety, and Virginia wins the game 22-20. I like the offensive scheme that Virginia has going, but they're just so inconsistent and still a step away in terms of having high level talent. So I'm very worried for them that they may get tripped up in one of these games despite having a relatively easy schedule the rest of the way. There is a path to 11-1, but they could also drop a game or two. Be careful backing Virginia the next couple of weeks. A game in the SEC that we broke down to a T this week. Texas struggles mightily but comes away with a close victory in Kroger Field against Kentucky, 16-13 in overtime. This was always going to be a tough hangover spot for Texas after the big emotional win over Oklahoma, and Kentucky is not an easy place to play. They've got a feisty defense. They run the ball very effectively. Kentucky able to hold the ball for nearly 40 of the 60 minutes of this game and honestly should have won outright. Texas only put up 179 total yards in this game. Kentucky 395, but just unable to finish drives. This is something we talk about week after week on this podcast. You can move the ball up and down the field all you want, but if you're not effective in the red zone, if you can't make field goals, if you can't convert short fields into touchdowns, you're going to struggle in these games. So some teams have a lot of empty yardage, and in this case, that was Kentucky, unfortunately. Too many missed opportunities, and Mark Stoops doesn't look like he's having a great time on the sidelines right now. Staying in the SEC, Alabama continues to look like arguably the best team in the country. They did get outgained in total yardage in this game against Tennessee, but they won 37-20. This is just the Kalen DeBoer way. We've seen it since his time at Washington. He doesn't necessarily have to blow every team out, but they are very disciplined and they make all of the key plays when they need to. For example, it should have been a 16-14 game at halftime. Instead, the final play of the first half was a pick six for Alabama. They make it 23-7, and Tennessee never able to recover from there. Huge play by Zabian Brown, and the Alabama secondary continues to be elite. Missouri kept their playoff and SEC title hopes alive with a clutch road win against Auburn in overtime, 23-17. This was a very ugly game as predicted. Neither team really able to establish the run very well, as these were two very good run defenses coming in. This really was just a street fight that Missouri was able to come out on top of. Doesn't seem like Auburn really ever comes out on top of these games anymore. They've lost so many close games in recent years, and this may be the final nail in Hugh Freeze's coffin. One of the most hyped matchups of the day was USC hitting the road to take on Notre Dame in South Bend. However, this was not a close spread. When you looked at it from a betting point of view, Notre Dame closed as a 10.5-point favorite. They ended up winning the game by 10 points. So depending on when you grabbed this line, the timing was important, unfortunately. Notre Dame had countless opportunities as well to extend this. I guess you could argue the same for USC in the first half, but Notre Dame in particular had one key opportunity missed, which was one of the worst interceptions I have ever seen a quarterback throw. CJ Carr down near the end zone, ran all the way back to nearly the 30-yard line before just chucking it into coverage. He is very talented and he trusts his arm a lot. I hope that he will continue to have that confidence moving forward. Next year, as we've said multiple times, he'll be near the top of the Heisman watch list. This year, though, he's obviously still got some progressing to do. Notre Dame leaned much more on Jeremiah Love in this game, 24 carries for 228 yards, and the backup Price added 87 yards as well. So just a dominant display by Notre Dame's run game. USC, as much as they have improved along the lines of scrimmage, still not able to match up with a team of Notre Dame's caliber on the road against a team that knows they have no margin for error the rest of the way. Another ugly game in the night slate was between Utah and BYU. The Holy War was just 10-7 going into the fourth quarter. There were some fireworks late to push it up to 24-21, the final for BYU. Very frustrating to watch as a Utah backer. I mentioned this one last week to you guys, and I really felt even after the game that Utah was the better team. They just once again squandered some opportunities. We see it week after week with some of these teams. Utah was actually stopped on downs one time in each quarter for a total of 4 failed fourth down conversions in this game. Just remarkable, the lack of execution on those plays. Once again, Utah really able to do whatever they wanted for most of the game, but just unable to capitalize on some key opportunities, and that will likely cost them a place in the Big 12 title conversation. One more game that we need to mention before we move ahead and discuss Week 9. Florida State, late night, traveling to Stanford. Surely this is a get-right spot for a team that's very talented, but somehow 0-3 in the ACC. Nope, make that 0-4 in the ACC now for Florida State, and 9 straight conference losses for Mike Norvell. How did it all go so wrong after the Alabama win? I really don't understand what happened to that Florida State team that looked so effective on both sides of the ball. Stanford is a much inferior team to them athletically. They really didn't do anything offensively, running for 2.9 yards per carry. Their quarterback threw for 90 yards before getting knocked out. The backup didn't do much either. Florida State, just no excuses here. They should have won the game. They didn't. And big problems moving forward. I'm not sure what's going on there as far as the coaching. Some people are saying Mike Norvell is on the hot seat. I'm not sure what to make of it. It's surely a talented roster, and they should be playing better. We'll see how they finish the season. Looking ahead to some interesting games in Week 9. How about we start with the Virginia Cavaliers? This is a team I just mentioned as one you should be careful of betting. They opened as a 10.5-point favorite at North Carolina, and it's slowly creeping down. It's all the way down to 9.5. It might continue to move down. This Virginia team has been very fortunate in recent weeks, and North Carolina easily could have won this past weekend at California. It's not a good UNC team by any means, but this could be a good situational spot for them. Speaking of situational spots, Wake Forest has a great one this upcoming weekend against SMU. SMU is in a back-to-back road spot after beating Clemson this weekend, and Wake Forest comes in off of a bye. This is a 4-2 team that just went on the road to Oregon State and demolished them with their backup quarterback. I think he may have won the job moving forward, so we'll see how they look in this one. The line has already dropped from Wake plus 6.5 down to 3.5. I think they win this game outright. A huge ranked matchup between two SEC teams in the noon window. Ole Miss traveling to Norman, Oklahoma as a 4.5-point underdog. This is another back-to-back road spot. Second career SEC road start for Trinidad Chambliss, and definitely against the best defense that he's seen so far this year. That line continues to creep towards Oklahoma as the week moves on. Big game in the American Conference between South Florida and Memphis. Memphis is coming off a Major upset loss at UAB as a 24-point favorite. UAB, big win for them after firing their coach, but now a great opportunity to buy low with Memphis as a 3.5-point home underdog. USF has been a tough team to fade this season, but if there ever was a spot to do it, I think it's this one. Auburn against Arkansas in the battle of SEC teams that most desperately need a win. This is one I would recommend staying far away from unless you have some sort of insider source. We have two games in the afternoon with ranked teams hitting the road to face unranked teams as underdogs. Illinois is about a 5-point dog on the road at Washington. Big bounce back spot for the Huskies after the loss at Michigan, and we know they play much better typically at home. And also, Iowa State is a 2.5-point favorite against number 11 BYU. These are the two teams I've probably had the least success with betting over the last 2 years, so I will be staying far away from this one. Expecting a solid defensive performance by both teams in that one, probably a lean towards an under on the total. College game day is going to Nashville for Vanderbilt against Missouri. This is a top 15 matchup. Vanderbilt is now number 10 in the country after their big win against LSU. They'll have another chance to do it against what honestly is a very similar team in terms of their profile with Missouri. I would expect a very similar result here as well. Vandy, once again, about a 3-point favorite, just as they were against LSU. Should be a high-level football game. A very random matchup in the G5 with Toledo hitting the road to take on Washington State. The Cougars are a 1.5-point favorite in that game. The numbers do like Toledo there, but we will have to dig into that one a little bit more before we know if we want to trust the Rockets traveling across the country. Texas is another team this week in a back-to-back road spot as they travel to Starkville, Mississippi to take on Mississippi State. They are just a 6.5-point favorite at the time of recording this. This is going to be another difficult test for an offense that has really struggled this year. Mississippi State has a very good secondary. Texas should have a big advantage at the line of scrimmage in this game, but once again, a feisty team that you really cannot take a win against for granted. I'm expecting another dogfight here for Texas. And one more game before we close this podcast out for the week. Also in the SEC, number 3 Texas A&M. Yes, number 3 hits the road to take on LSU. Now a desperate team with 2 losses. This is really a must-win for Brian Kelly. They are now a 2.5-point underdog, though. The line has flipped since the look-ahead line from the offseason was LSU minus 4.5, and it is now crossed 0 with Texas A&M as a 2.5-point road favorite here. Very difficult to win in Death Valley, but also very difficult to get in front of this A&M team right now. Should be a phenomenal matchup late in the evening. For more complete breakdowns of the entire slate, make sure you join us over on Twitter, live on Spaces every Saturday morning at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. A couple of co-hosts and I take about 2 hours leading up to the noon kickoffs and break down all of the biggest games across the Saturday slate and try and find the people as many winners as possible. Hope to see all of you in there, but until then, enjoy the rest of your